All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm going to start in 1 second. Excuse me. Okay. Okay. Let's get going. So, in this week's Torah portion, one of the highlights of this week's Torah portion, we have the 10 Commandments, and of course, we have the Shema prayer. And in the Shema prayer, we have the commandment. There's a few commandments in the Shema prayer. Probably just the first. We're talking about the first paragraph here. It's probably 5 or 6, just right there. And of course, one of them is to put on tefillin. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is the putting on tefillin, and specifically its connection to the land of Israel. So let's get into it. So of course, like we said, in this week's Torah portion, it says, "Ukshartim leosa yadacha," you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and it shall be a ornaments, is how they translate it in the English. Taitafis doesn't really have, it's not really a Hebrew word, doesn't really translate. The rabbis in the Talmud explain that's really a Persian word, etc. However you want to translate it, the bottom line is the Jewish tradition tells us what's the sign. Is it a stop sign? Is it a green light sign? The answer is that the Talmud tells us that the tefillin are, on the hand is a box that has all 4 portions that are mentioned, the tefillin. The tefillin is mentioned 4 times in the Torah. So all 4 are written on a scroll and put inside the box. And the head tefillin are 4 compartments, and each one has a different, all 4 compartments each have one of the Torah portions that discusses the tefillin, and each one goes into a different compartment, and they're squished together to make a box. So they both look like the same size boxes, but actually the head tefillin is actually 4 separate boxes, and there has to actually be a gap between them. You might not realize that there's a gap because they squish them together so well, but there always has to be a gap. And that is what tefillin are, and of course, Jewish men put them on every single day, traditionally during the morning prayers. Okay, so what does tefillin have to do with the land of Israel? So here's a little bit of going back a little bit in history, about 50, 60 years ago, probably closer to 70 years ago at this point. The story of the 6-Day War. Now, in the summer and the spring of 1967, there were a lot of tensions going on with Israel and its surrounding neighbors. I'm not going to get into all the details. And eventually, the Egyptians surrounded. They were promising all the different nations, Syria and Egypt and Jordan, were promising to wipe Israel off the map. Egypt eventually brings 100,000 soldiers into the Sinai Peninsula, and they ask the UN peacekeeping troops to leave, which they did. Which maybe I'm not sure what peacekeeping troops just leave. I'm not sure what's the point of them, but that's what happened. And they closed the Straits of Tiran, which is a naval shipping route and a general shipping route, important. And eventually, for a few weeks, they were just kind of waiting for the moment to attack. And a lot of Jewish people were frightened. They were predicting another Holocaust for those few weeks. It was a very difficult time. On Lag BaOmer of that year, the Prime Minister of Israel was a man named Levi Eshkol, and he made a radio broadcast. He was supposed to calm the nation. However, it didn't really work. He ended up, he kind of like, he had like papers in front of him, and he was reading off his papers. He started to stumble, and he was sweating, and the whole thing was disaster. And it kind of gave more fuel to the hysteria that was going on. A few hours later in New York, the Lubavitch Rebbe was addressing a children's parade in Brooklyn, New York. And on Lag BaOmer, whenever it fell on a Sunday, the Rebbe would have a parade with children. And the Rebbe had a totally different message than everybody else. So we're just going to quote just a few lines from this message. So the Rebbe said, and again, this is the children primarily, our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land of Israel are currently in a state which God is protecting them and sending them his blessings and salvation in increased measure, so they will be delivered from the current situation. You have the obligation and merit of helping them. This is to the children. You can achieve this by studying another verse of Torah and observing more and more mitzvahs, not passing up any mitzvah opportunity. You should exercise love for your fellow Jews in this regard and influence your friends and families to do the same. So the Rebbe is telling children that, first of all, the Rebbe says God will deliver the Jewish people from their current situation. He doesn't say that there's a dire situation and everything's terrible. He's saying God will deliver the Jewish people. And the Rebbe says that how do we do that? Through children, telling children if they all do another mitzvah and they influence their friends to do a mitzvah, through loving your fellow Jew, that will bring the salvation. And later, the Rebbe spoke on Shabbos, right before the war broke out, just 2 days before the war broke out. The Rebbe spoke about putting on Tefillin, specifically with the IDF soldiers. And the Rebbe quoted two things about Tefillin that are unique about the mitzvah of putting on Tefillin. It says in the Talmud, in the Gemara Menachos, it says, anybody who puts on Tefillin lives a long life, or will live a long life. So we see here specifically that through putting on Tefillin, one merits long life. So the Rebbe said that through the IDF soldiers putting on Tefillin, they will merit to live a long life. And then the Rebbe said there's another Gemara that's brought in Gemara and Brachas, and in that tractate, the Talmud tells us that when a person puts on Tefillin, that it's a fulfillment of the verse, and all the nations of the world will see that the name of God is upon you, and they will fear you. Right? So we see that the Talmud says this is referring to Tefillin on the head, that when they see your Tefillin, when you're wearing Tefillin on your head, they will see the name of God is literally upon you, and they will fear you. And the Rebbe explained further that it's not just referring to the time that the Talmud doesn't specify, that it's referring to the time, or the verse, I should say, doesn't specify that it's referring to the time when you're wearing the Tefillin, they will fear you. When you're not wearing the Tefillin, they won't fear you. It doesn't say that. Because it actually even after the people are have already worn Tefillin that day, it continues, and that protection continues, and our enemies will fear us even after the person is wearing Tefillin. And the Rebbe proves this through a number of different ways, bringing other examples of the Jewish people being victorious, etc. And this was a very different message than everybody else was talking about in Israel and other places. People were predicting the worst, and we all know what happened, that Israel was victorious, and not just victorious, but in a supernatural way. In just 6 days, they diminished they brought all these nations who were attacking to their knees, and it was all over. And they had peace for 7-8 years through that. Now, here's a little bit of a story about that time period. There was a man who was an ambassador to the United Nations. His name was Arthur Goldberg, and he had a relative of his whose son was learning in a Lubavitcher yeshiva in Israel, and a Chabad yeshiva, and the Rebbe had told his students and followers, please don't, there's no need to run away and from the land of Israel. The land of Israel is the safest place in the world. It's the land that God's eyes are upon it, and the Lord of Israel doesn't slumber or sleep. But his parents are very worried that he's studying in this yeshiva and he's not leaving because the Rebbe told him not to. So they tried to get an audience with the Rebbe. It was impossible. The Rebbe was too busy. So this UN member, who was their cousin, they reached out to him, and they said, maybe you could go talk to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for us. He said, yeah, I'm an ambassador. If I say who I am, I'm going to come. They'll give me an appointment right away, And sure enough, that's what happened. He got an immediate appointment the next couple days, and he went to speak to the Rebbe. And he said, I'm actually here. I kind of, misused my power, and I'm actually here on a personal thing. My cousin, their only son, is living in Israel and studying in your yeshiva and in this Chabad institution. And they said, maybe you could give him permission to leave. And the Rebbe said, no. The land of Israel is very well protected by God, and there's no reason to leave. And they said, but it's their only son. And the Rebbe said, I have thousands of only children who are in Israel right now. And that was Rebbe's approach. That Rebbe wasn't trying to be favorites over one or the other. Rebbe said, this is the reality. And obviously, creating panic by telling people to leave would not be helpful. And in the end, that he tried explaining to the Rebbe, says, listen, I know I'm involved in intelligence, and I know how bad it is. And the Rebbe said, if you really want to do something, you could put on tefillin. And not only that, the Rebbe said that you could put on tefillin by his father, the father of this boy. By putting on tefillin will help his son and help the effort in the land of Israel. And essentially what the Rebbe explained at a later date, this idea that because Jewish people, we are all responsible for each other. And in fact, this idea of responsibility is called din arvus, which means responsibility. And this actually has a lot of halachic repercussions. For example, the reason why one person is allowed to, for example, if you've ever gone to a Shabbat dinner, you'll have one person will make the Kiddush, and everybody else will just listen. Even though there's a biblical obligation for everybody to make Kiddush on Friday night, the Torah tells us is in the Ten Commandments, you shall remember the Shabbos, which refers to the Kiddush. So how come it is that I can make the Kiddush and everyone around could just listen? So the reason is because I have a responsibility for every single person at that table, and they have a responsibility for me, and therefore I could take responsibility. I could actually materialize that responsibility by making this Kiddush for them, and everybody could listen. And there's many, many halachic ideas that actually have practical application. And the Rebbe put that to this as well, that not only if the IDF soldiers put on tefillin, but any Jew puts on tefillin will help the protection in the land of Israel. And again, because that makes the other nations fear us, and also makes the tefillin bring long life. Now, people started to criticize the Rebbe's what became known as the Tefillin campaign. Many Jews all over Israel at that time and later times, put on tefillin. They ever met a Chabad rabbi, including myself. If you're a Jewish man over the age of 13, probably have been encouraged to put on tefillin. And again, it's not just unique to Chabad; it's all over the Jewish spectrum. People putting on tefillin, and whenever there's, unfortunately, like we have now, some sort of situation in Israel, there's always more inspiration to put on tefillin. So people began to criticize the Rebbe's campaign for Jewish people to put on tefillin, and they said, "Listen, the problem is that you're doing a mitzvah for an ulterior motive." They felt that why did we put on tefillin? Because God commanded us to put on tefillin, not because of some sort of thing that we'll get out of it. And the Rebbe addressed this as well, and essentially the Rebbe said that two things. Number one is that the Pirkei Avos tells us that we should always do something even for not its sake, right? From the idea that we'll do it for not its sake, we will come to do it for the proper reason as well. So that is brought and is brought by Maimonides in his commentary to the Mishnah. The Maimonides discusses about how to influence people to do mitzvahs. So he says in Maimonides in his commentary on the Mishnah, he says that you start with a child and you give him candies, right? That's how you encourage them. And how do you get when he gets a little bit older? You tell him, you give him a little money, a little financial reward. You give him a couple dollars, and then when he gets older, you tell him, listen, you'll be a big rabbi, you'll be respected, you could be a scholar, and even for an adult, right? There's reward and punishment, etc. So we see that there is an idea there's a Jewish idea of doing things for ulterior motives to get you to the proper result and to the proper motives. And then the Rebbe goes on to another idea, even more fundamental. And the Rebbe explains this idea that actually not only is it the idea that you're going to get to you do it for the wrong reasons, you get to the right reasons. The Rebbe is saying that even actually when you're doing it for the right reasons. Why? When a person puts on tefillin, what does he do? He says a blessing. Before you put on tefillin, you say the blessing. Blessed are you, God, who commanded us to put on tefillin. So by making the blessing, he's acknowledging that in that moment, actually, he's putting on tefillin for the correct reason. And the Rebbe brings a proof for this from the Talmud in Tractate Pesachim, page A and page B. Excuse me. The Talmud says somebody who gives charity, and he says, I'm giving charity so that my son should live, or that I should get reward in the world to come. The Talmud says this person is completely righteous. How is it possible he's completely righteous? He just did it for the ulterior motive. So Rashi explains as follows. Rashi says, in this regard, we do not say that it is not for the sake of heaven. Rather, they have fulfilled the mitzvah of charity, even if they intended it for their own benefit. So Rashi, on his commentary on the Talmud, says that no, you're actually in that moment. He's still doing it even though he said that he's doing it for something else. In his essence, you could say, he's really doing it for the right reason. And we see this through the fact that when it comes to tefillin, we make a blessing and we thank God for giving us this opportunity, so that He commanded us to do it. So we see that even in that moment, He's doing it for the right reasons. And then the Rebbe goes on a little bit further at a different occasion. The Rebbe explained further why it's important why specifically he stressed the mitzvah of tefillin. Why not tzitzis? Why not prayer, etc.? And the Rebbe said we see actually from that same section of Talmud this idea that this person, he gave charity in order that his son should live. Why didn't that person, eat kosher that his son should live? Because the idea of charity actually has this idea that charity makes, because you're giving from your life, right? Your money represents your life, because it actually takes your time. That's part of your life. Your blood, sweat, and tears. Right, to create a living, and that gets you an exchange value of money, and then you give that you worked hard for, your money, and you give it to somebody who needs it, I guess more than you, and through that they're able to live. So you exchange your life for their life, and therefore you're kind of asking. So therefore we ask God when we give charity that we should get life in exchange for that. Right, that's kind of the idea. So the Rebbe says that when we do that, we specifically are supposed to do a mitzvah that's connected that has the thing that God tells us that has the benefit for. In other words, putting on tzitzis, even though it's a wonderful mitzvah and it says that tzitzis is equal to all the mitzvahs, etc. Nonetheless, specifically tefillin, the Talmud tells us when the nations of the world see us wearing tefillin, that then they will fear us. So it's important that we focus on this mitzvah, because this mitzvah specifically is connected to the thing that we are discussing. And on a final note, I'll just we'll talk a little bit about the actual mitzvah of tefillin and what it accomplishes. So there's a very interesting Talmudic passage in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, page 39a, as follows. A very strange story. A certain sorcerer said to Amemar. Amemar was a rabbi in the Talmud. The upper half of the body is from God, and the lower half of the body is from a demon. Okay? And he used these Persian words, hormiz and hormun. Okay? So essentially he was saying that your upper body is your intellect and etc. And your lower body is where you go to the bathroom, etc. That's from a demon. That has nothing to do with your intellect, and that belongs to a demon, and your body's controlled by two different things. There's no connection between them. So Amemar responded to the sorcerer, if that's the case, why does the demon allow the godly part of the body to pass water right through his territory, right? The upper body is the part that drinks water, but the bottom part of the body is where the water goes out. So why? Obviously there's a connection between the two, and he kind of disproved this sorcerer's idea of a sorcerer is an idolater, probably better translation, however you want to translate it, that this sorcerer wanted, to say that there's the upper body, the intellect, that's one part, and the bottom is nothing to do. Now, it's a very bizarre story, of a debate between a rabbi and a sorcerer, and it's recorded in the Talmud. So actually, There's a very important lesson though we can learn from this. That there is this idea of a split between our physical realm, the upper realm, and the lower realm. So the upper realm represents intellect, like we said, or in service of God. It could be prayer and Torah study. That's kind of our upper part of our body, and the lower part of our body is our regular life, a regular material world, where we engage in commerce, we engage in family, we engage in eating and drinking. There's the upper and the lower, and a person could think that there's no connection between them, that our spiritual pursuits and our material and physical pursuits are totally different, and are to the point where they are led by two different people almost. And the truth is that actually it's the other way. It's the one of the things that Tefillin shows us is that we put the Tefillin on our head, and the straps. The Talmud tells us the straps have to reach past the person's navel. Okay, most straps today they make them extra long because some sources say they should go even longer. They go very long. The point is that the head and the spiritual should affect the material, right? And that is what the tefillin represents. And even more than that, on the hand tefillin goes on the left arm versus the right arm. Every other mitzvah, we always do it with our right hand. If a person gives charity, they should give it with their right hand. And this, by the way, doesn't apply to somebody who's left-handed. It's a whole different conversation. A left-handed person puts on tefillin on the other hand. But for most people, and even, by the way, according to Jewish law, a left-handed person, essentially his right hand is his left hand, so just backwards. But anyways, so a person puts on the left. The left represents kind of the opposite of holiness. Holiness is represented by the right. That's why we always try to do things with our right hand or the right side. But here the Torah tells us to bind the left side, bind the tefillin on our left side. And by this, we actually show that the tefillin are not just that our left side is antithetical to holiness, but actually we could use it to bind our tefillin. We could use it to bind ourselves to that thing, and actually use it for good, and totally flip over the negative into a positive. So to finish off today's discussion is that it's important for us to recognize that everything that we do, number one, everything we do has an effect on ourselves. Number two, it has an effect on others. And when we put on tefillin, even though we may not be in the land of Israel, we may not be fighting on the front lines, when we put on tefillin, it actually has a tremendous effect on us, and it has a tremendous effect on by extension, our brothers and sisters, wherever they may be, and brings us and brings us protection, safety, and security for the Jewish people. And God willing, with the coming of Mashiach, will be the ultimate safety and security for all the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Thank you very much for joining, and God willing, have a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.